Good afternoon. Welcome to the 17th Annual Women Building Community Lunch Online. I'm Tana Clues, CEO of the New Hampshire Women's Foundation, and we are so grateful that you are joining us today, tuning in on your phones, televisions, or computers. We know many of you have other demands for your time, and we are so grateful you're taking this hour to spend with us. We had such high hopes to gather in person this fall, but as you know, our luncheon is not a small event. 700 women and men building community together and celebrating the women and girls in the Granite State. The dramatic rise in COVID rates this fall required us to make this event once again virtual to ensure your safety and ours. We are hopeful that next fall we'll be together again to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Title IX at our 18th annual Women Building Community Luncheon. Although we can't be together in person, we are hoping you can help us create an online community by sharing your comments, photos, and dialogue on YouTube and Facebook. Please use the hashtag #WomenBuildingCommunity and share how you are building community today. Today would not be possible without our corporate sponsors, including our presenting sponsor, Dartmouth Hitchcock Health, our gold and silver sponsors, and of course, I want to thank my Women's Foundation colleagues, in particular, Crystal Parody, Samantha Granville, and Karen Tebenhoff. Putting on an event like this one is a monumental undertaking. I'm grateful for your unwavering commitment and integrity. And of course, to our audiovisual partners here in our studio, Events United. It's been a very long 20 months, and COVID-19 continues to disproportionately take its toll on women, particularly women of color and low-income women. Recently, we've had some reason to celebrate, thanks to the availability of vaccines for children ages 5 through 11 and for their return to school this fall. But we also know the pandemic exposed the fragility and inequality in our healthcare, economic, and caregiving systems. We are committed to being part of the solution to build back differently, so that women don't find themselves carrying the burdens of the next pandemic or crisis. During COVID, the Women's Foundation has focused on ensuring that our programs were meeting the needs of women and girls in New Hampshire by increasing our grant making, expanding our research, and making our leadership programs, including Women Run, available to a broader cohort of women running for local and state office. We also used this time during the pandemic to reflect on our values and look forward towards the next chapter of the Women's Foundation. Centering ourselves on our core values of equity and justice, empowerment and collaboration, and being a bold and courageous voice in the march towards gender equality, I am pleased to share the strategic priorities approved by our board that will carry us into that next chapter. They are voice, money, and power. Voice. We believe that in order to realize gender equality, we must elevate the voices of women and girls to amplify their experiences, cultivate community, and drive systemic change. We also must use our platform as a champion for gender equality and a trusted source of data to make sure these voices are listened to and inform our actions and investments. Money. As a statewide community foundation, we harness the transformative power of philanthropic dollars to advance gender equality and equity in New Hampshire and drive that systemic change. But let's be honest, in order to do this well, we need to do this on a much larger scale, with more investments in the foundation and more dollars going back out the door to our grantees. We will do this by expanding our suite of philanthropic tools, starting with our Women and Girls of Color Fund and our Reproductive and Sexual Health Access Fund. These two field of interest funds, along with an expanded array of field of interest funds, will help us drive dollars to the areas that we believe most need these dollars. To be clear, we aren't just talking about a larger grant-making program, but about being nimble enough to get dollars out the door and increasing our impact. As an example, last month, the New Hampshire Executive Council voted against Title X contracts to 3 family planning providers in the state, who also, coincidentally, provide abortions. Within days of that terrible decision, we issued grants to all 3 organizations, Planned Parenthood of Northern New England, the Joan G. Lovering Health Center, and Equality Health Center, along with a strongly worded statement condemning the council's vote. The grants we sent to these organizations were just a fraction of the money they lost in their Title X contracts, but we wanted to use our voice and dollars to make a clear statement. Withholding funding for much-needed reproductive and sexual health services is unacceptable, and the Women's Foundation will always stand with Granite State women and girls. As you know, today, the U.S. Supreme Court is hearing a challenge to Roe v. Wade and access to abortion care for pregnant people across the country. As a pro-choice statewide community foundation, we support access to a full range of reproductive and sexual health care for all who need it. We look forward to joining our colleagues in New Hampshire to advocate for the Access to Abortion Care Act, which we believe will help ensure women and families in the Granite State can work with their doctors to get the reproductive health care they need. And our final strategic priority, power. We believe that if you don't have a seat at the table, you'll be on the menu. Naming power as a strategic priority underscores our commitment to going all in on increasing women's leadership and collective power in New Hampshire, and using this collective power to advance long-term policy priorities and drive systemic change in coalition with our allies and our partners. We believe increasing the number of women at the table will transform the landscape of women and girls leadership in New Hampshire. You'll be hearing much more from us in the coming months about our strategic priorities, but in the meantime, visit our website to learn more. We hope you'll join us in our efforts to expand the voice, power, and money for women, girls, non-binary, and marginalized genders, so that New Hampshire can be a state where all people have social, political, and economic equality. I would not be doing my job if I didn't say, please use this opportunity and this event to donate to the Women's Foundation. It's so easy to give. You can text NHWF to 44321 or visit our website, nhwomensfoundation.org. I am pleased to welcome Jennifer Gilkey, System Vice President of Communications and Marketing at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Health. Dartmouth is a valued partner of the Women's Foundation, and we are grateful they recognize the importance of investing in the Women's Foundation and the work that we do.
Thank you, Tana. I'm so pleased to join you today. The mission of the New Hampshire Women's Foundation to invest in women and girls, to empower them to reach their potential, to innovate, to inspire, and to achieve their potential has long been an inspiration to us at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Health, and a personal inspiration for me. I am so proud that we are the lead sponsor of today's important event, and I'm pleased to deliver these remarks on behalf of the Dartmouth-Hitchcock Health System. Today's focus is voice, money, power. Just think about those words for a moment and absorb them. We hear them every day, but we don't often think about them as tools in our toolbox to move past roadblocks, to inspire, and to achieve whatever goals we set. As a communications and marketing professional, I'm going to address the voice element of this triad as it pertains to gender justice and equality. Our voice, our voices. How we communicate can either reflect the people we work for and with, or it can reinforce discrimination and marginalization of specific groups of people. If we want to change the conversation, truly change it, to address implicit bias, to overcome stereotypical thinking, and to become more inclusive, more welcoming, more understanding of one another, we must really reflect on who we are as individuals, organizations, and community members. To become a more inclusive society, we have to reflect on our past, understand it, to learn from it. As an organization that cares deeply about our patients, families, staff, communities, and businesses, Dartmouth-Hitchcock Health is taking the steps necessary to ensure that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is a priority throughout our system and the community at large. Having worked to lead communications in the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors for the past 2 decades, I have been part of the evolving conversation about inclusive representation in marketing, communications, and media. Within the healthcare sector, it is evident that now, more than ever before, patients, employees, and potential employees are paying attention to how organizations and businesses present themselves, who they are including or excluding. In short, it is easy to discover who they really are. With a 24/7 news cycle and social media often driving the conversation, it's not hard to find out what makes an organization tick. Is it one that people will want to work for or get services from? Or is it one that people will stay away from? The answers are not as hard to find as they once were. If the goal is to become an employer of choice or the healthcare provider of choice, what you communicate to staff and patients must be accurate, real, and not just aspirational. We must strive to encourage diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in our staff, and to bring those tenets forward to anyone we serve or could serve. And so I come back to the importance of voice. We need to own our voices in order to own the responsibility to help the marginalized in society overcome challenges. Create a full spectrum of inclusivity that we spread by using our voices. Our voices are powerful, and we all can be part of the solution. At Dartmouth-Hitchcock Health, we are proud to use our voice to partner with the New Hampshire Women's Foundation to support the critical work they do all year long. Women in leadership roles will continue to move the needle, and we at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Health are proud to continue our efforts to make diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging the pillars of who we are as your healthcare provider, neighbor, friend. We are part of the fabric of our communities. And speaking of communities, it is my pleasure to introduce a music video from Girls Inc., an organization that inspires girls statewide to be strong, smart, and bold. And these girls are inspiring. Enjoy.
You are the light in the dark. You held me up when I fall down. I'm not alone. I'm not alone. Not alone. Not alone. Not alone.
Together we are stronger. Together we are better. There for each other even through the stormy weather. The snow, the cold, the wind, the rain, whatever. Just grab my hand and we'll face this together. We are smart and strong, we are bold and brave. We'll have each other's backs even when we're old and gray. We are kind and honest, we are loyal and true. We climb up any mountain just to be enjoying the view. We are not alone even when we feel it. Even when everything is scary and hard to deal with. We are not alone, even by ourselves. There's someone out there right now who'd love trying to help. And maybe that's you, or maybe what you're needing. Either way, just know you're not alone, please believe it. Together, we make it. Together, we grow. Together, forever, you're never alone.
You are the light in the dark. You held me up when I fall down. I'm not alone. I'm not alone. Not alone. Not alone. Not alone.
Thank you, Girls Inc., for that incredible music video. Earlier today, at our Girls in the 603 Symposium, we unveiled our inaugural Status of Girls in New Hampshire report, a first-of-its-kind comprehensive report on girls in the Granite State. This biennial report will be a sister publication to our flagship Status of Women in New Hampshire. It includes indicators on girls' education, health, and safety. If you missed our Girls in the 603 event, don't worry. We'll be sharing the video soon, and you can see this report at our website, nhwomensfoundation.org. As a nod to our Status of Girls report, we wanted to bring you 3 girls to tell you their stories of activism and research here in New Hampshire. We're starting with Lane, a girl who we first partnered with 4 years ago when we worked on her first ever testimony in front of the New Hampshire legislature. She's continued to be a strong voice for not just trans girls, but for the rights of all people. Lane?
Thank you. My name is Lane, and I'm 17 years old. Ever since I could talk, I told my parents I am a girl. In elementary school, I presented as a boy, and then would change into Lane the girl when I came home. I was living a double life. At first, my parents had a hard time understanding because my pediatrician told them it was just a phase. But I'm so lucky to have a relationship with them where I can be myself and they support me to the fullest. In middle school, I was able to socially transition when I presented a coming out video to my classmates. I was overwhelmed by the support and was met with applause by my peers. It was the best day of my life. From that day on, I've been able to be my true self at home and at school. I've even been able to testify at the New Hampshire State House in support of equal rights for girls like me. A few years ago, I was one of the only trans voices speaking up at the hearing when trans girls in sports were under attack. But this year, when a similar bill was introduced, the hearing looked very different. During the full-day committee hearing, one after another, voices of so many people, including family members of trans kids and their allies, rose up alongside with mine. Seeing that change over just a few years was incredible. Today, I'm using my voice to fight for the inclusion of LGBTQ+ people in school curriculum. It's important to not just teach about white, cisgender, heterosexual men in history because it's not a full and accurate representation. Trans people have been around forever, and trans girls like me deserve an education where we are represented. Use your voice for what you believe in, because the more you do, the more voices will join you. Together, our place in history will be undeniable. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sanaya, and I'm 15 years old. I've been asked what truly inspired me to become so passionate about my work within activism for marginalized groups, especially at such a young age. There really is no one answer, but some of the most significant impacts were most likely in my childhood. I grew up consistently reading books, watching documentaries, and learning about different social justice leaders, thanks to my mom's encouragement. I even remember I used to have to read 3 biographies of any individual of my choice over the summer vacations in late elementary. However, I can say it was only as I became older within recent years that I began to understand and recognize the connection to the work that is much needed today and the true significance of fighting for justice for everyone, especially young females like me. My family and I are originally from Eastern Pennsylvania. We moved to Exeter when I began 6th grade, and the transition was an amazing eye-opener and culture shock to experience such a shift in the level of diversity here. Although I gained some nice beaches and some nice coffee shops, I was also welcome to all kinds of harassment, bullying, microaggressions, both in and out of school. I can admit situations like these aren't easy subjects to discuss. But what work will be achieved if we blatantly ignore the distressing occurrences because of a few people's feeling of discomfort? This is why providing safe communities and opportunities for young women, especially young women of color, to share their voices is so crucial to achieving equality. I've always said education is the root to any attainment, which is why I continue to believe all individuals need to listen to and understand women's perspective of society and evaluate their own actions and impact on women's lives and triumph. Understanding and recognizing the negative events that happen and continue to happen needs to be an initial step, distinctly when many choose to disregard the matters. We also need to remember to be actively intersectional when supporting women, providing equal money distribution and accessibility to healthcare, housing, and necessities for women who don't have access to them. We need to integrate more of women's voices within the education system, actively hear youth's voices and perspectives, and admit who has caused this adversity and why it needs to be changed. Many successful Black women have continuously influenced my drive to make an impact. Idols such as Angela Davis, Maya Angelou, Ida B. Wells, and many more women from both the past and present who have changed history for women through their work. Now, as I stand as the co-director of Balaam Seacoast Youth Division and a young Black activist. Through my work, I've had the opportunity to participate in panels, protests, events, and speak on issues that are important in hopes to bring light to the subjects of necessity and value. I want to leave you today with the words of Sojourner Truth. That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lift over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. Ain't I a woman? This goes out as a reminder of how continuing this movement, keeping it inclusive of all, and educating ourselves is what we need to further women's voices and actions within the world. And the accomplishments that can come from practicing and enforcing these principles can lead for us to achieve the biggest impacts within women's history yet. Thank you.
My name is Sarah, and I'm a 17-year-old student here in New Hampshire. Earlier this year, I was assigned a project while searching for a worthwhile subject to focus on. My librarian handed me a book on Marietta Chase, a women's rights activist and a former president of the New Hampshire Women's Suffrage Association. And over 120 years ago, she just happened to be the principal of my school. I was hooked. Through my research, I discovered a badass woman who gave speeches on inequality of women in her time. And then she organized to make equality possible. I started speaking up more on my own campus and protesting about women's rights today, which are still under attack. Over a century later, part of Mary Ann Chase's legacy was successfully removing the word male from the voting rights section of the New Hampshire Constitution. And she went on to fight for the rights of refugees across the world. It got me thinking, what will my legacy for women's equality be? Unfortunately, many inequalities persist for women and girls today. Girls have to work harder to be taken seriously in many classrooms. Discrimination, which follows into the workforce. Women are still paid less than men for the same work and expected to do more unpaid emotional labor. And it's even worse for women of color, trans women, and women with families. If Mary Ann Chase was here today, what would she say about women still not achieving economic equality? And as a girl entering womanhood, what will I say about it? I want girls in the future to feel supported in the classroom and male teachers to ask how they can make that a reality. I want everyone to take more time to go to rallies and ask questions and listen to stories of all women of all kinds. I want to be a part of the ongoing education of our community so that if I have a daughter someday, it won't cost her more to just be herself. Finally, 120 years from now, I hope someone reads my story and is amazed how far we have come. I want to challenge you to join me on this project to make sure that women's inequalities girls and women today face are unimaginable for the next generation. I know we can do it. Let's get to work.
Weren't those terrific remarks from the three girls sharing their experiences in today's world? Real food for thought. Along with the showcase of our 2021 grantees. Good stuff. Thanks to you all. My name is Ellen Koenig, and I'm the Director of Grant Making at the New Hampshire Women's Foundation. One of the important tools we use to meet our mission is our community grant making. This is our chance to support organizations which work directly with women and girls in the state, providing bedrock services for women and girls who experience homelessness or domestic violence, expand opportunities for girls in STEM education, and enhance access to important health services, to name just a few. We've even recently funded more really creative projects, such as a yoga program in the New Hampshire Women's Prison, and one which creates curriculum that puts women back into history lessons for K through 12 teachers. But another important thing about grant making is that where we choose to invest our funds makes a bold statement about who we are. And in 2021, we did just that. Typically, we make a proactive grant to a single organization at this luncheon, which we call the She Change Award. This year, we decided to use those funds to call attention to the attack on reproductive rights, which we are seeing very clearly, both nationally and in our state. This is an important time for us to stand up and offer our support to key organizations who carry on with their work, despite regular picketing, personal harassment, and vandalism of their offices. We wanted those organizations to know that we stand with them in the important work they do. We're proud to welcome the leaders of two of these organizations we recently funded, telling us about their work and why it's important. We'll hear from Dalia Vadunas from the Equality Health Center in Concord and Sandy Denoncourt from the Joan G. Lovering Center in Greenland.
Thank you, Ellen, and good afternoon. My name is Sandra Denoncourt, and I'm the Executive Director of the Joan G. Lovering Health Center in Greenland.
And my name is Dalia Vadunas, and I'm the Executive Director at the Equality Health Center in Concord. Sandy and I represent two of the only independent reproductive health care providers left in the state of New Hampshire.
Our small clinics are essential to providing reproductive wellness care to our community. Although Joan G. Lovering offers abortion services, we also do much more, including wellness education, sexual health, gender-affirming care, full-range access to birth control, and full-scope STI testing and care.
Exactly. In addition to sexual and reproductive health care, including abortion care, Equality Health Center also offers behavioral health therapy, pregnancy tests, options counseling, and in-depth birth control counseling, much of which these services provided are for free to our members within the community who cannot afford our services otherwise.
We're nonprofit healthcare providers, and that means we're not built around providing services for profit or for volume alone. We provide full scope services for access, period.
Yet all over the country, we're seeing clinics like ours being forced to close due to budget cuts. Over 30% of all independent clinics in the U.S. have closed since 2012. 113 have closed in the last 5 years alone. As I'm sure you all know, earlier this year, New Hampshire passed the most extreme abortion ban in our history. And this fall, they defunded our clinics along with Planned Parenthood.
This is the first time in New Hampshire history we've seen an abortion ban and a defunding plan pass across the board since Roe versus Wade. But with supporters like the New Hampshire Women's Foundation stepping up to rush emergency grant funding, and just as important, a strong and public statement of support that was amplified by so many of you watching today, we're able to continue the important work that we do.
At Equality Health Center, one of the things that we specialize in is the care of those who've been victimized by sexual abuse and trauma. We work with patients that may not have gone to doctors in years because of their history of trauma. We're able to help them feel safe and provide them the care that they need. Recently, we had a young woman in her early 20s who has developmental disabilities and was a survivor of childhood sexual assault. And at the time she had come to us, she had never received a gynecological exam checkup. She brought her mother with her, and we were able to allow her parent in the exam room as a support throughout the appointment. One of our healthcare workers sat with this woman for over an hour, walking her through everything she was going to do, and also answering all of her questions before the procedure even began. During that procedure, the healthcare worker and the patient's mother held her hand and made her feel safe throughout the entire procedure. It was the look on the young woman's face after it was done that said everything. And she said, "I am safe here." This is the kind of care we're able to provide in our clinics as a small, independent clinic.
That story resonates so much with me, Dahlia, and it brings to mind so many similar stories. At the Lovering, we recently saw an immigrant woman who was working in the States but didn't have access to insurance plans and therefore didn't qualify for Medicaid. English was not her first language. However, she came in knowing exactly the care that she was seeking, and she was able to communicate with us that she needed access to birth control. She wanted to make sure that her future plans and ability to travel weren't jeopardized with an unexpected pregnancy. She wanted to have control over her body and her decisions, and we were able to give that control to her at almost no cost.
And that's why we do what we do, Sandy. At a quality health center, we were built by the community. And being a small, independent provider means that we can respond immediately to our community's needs, whether offering thoughtful, trauma-informed preventative care or being one of the only providers in our region to offer prescriptions to PrEP for patients who are at risk of HIV exposure.
And at Lovering Health Center, our mission is to never assume anything about our patients, from their pronouns to their reasons for coming through our doors. We approach each patient as a whole person in every conversation and work with them to make connections beyond our services so that they can make their way through the healthcare system with safety and dignity.
Small healthcare providers like ours are critical to meeting the needs of our community, and we need your help. Ask your local representatives whether they're running or serving in local or state offices already, if they're pro-choice, because the alternative means our future is at risk.
In addition to being active local constituents, share your stories and your experiences. When they seek to dismantle our reproductive rights, freedom, and access, we must rise up and say, we will not go back. Here in New Hampshire, the fight is active and the fight is now.
And that's why we're so excited to be here today with all of you, building community and building our collective voice, money, and power. On behalf of the Quality Health Center, thank you so much to the Women's Foundation for your support of our work and this opportunity to share a little bit more about how we're meeting the needs within our community.
On behalf of the Joan G. Lovering Health Center, thank you to the Women's Foundation and all of you watching across the state. Many of you stepped up to join the Foundation's support with the support of your own voice, money, and power. Whether you showed up by sending in a donation, offering to volunteer, or just sent us a note of support, we thank you. And we know that we'll be there for you too when you need us.
Thank you to Joan Lovering Health Center, the Quality Health Center, and Planned Parenthood of Northern New England for all the work that you're doing on behalf of everyone who needs your services. We are proud to support you and believe so strongly in the importance of having full access to reproductive and sexual health care. Thank you. I'm so pleased today to have two wonderful guests. First, we have Teresa Younger, who is president and CEO of the Ms. Foundation for Women. She's an activist, advocate, organizational strategist, and a proven leader in the philanthropic and policy sectors. She spent 20 years on the front lines of some of the most critical battles for comprehensive equity and the elimination of institutionalized oppression. Prior to joining the Ms. Foundation for Women, Teresa served as the executive director of the Connecticut Commission on the Status of Women and as an executive director of the ACLU of Connecticut, the first African American and the first woman to hold that position. Jennifer Lockwood-Shabat is the former president and CEO of the Washington Area Women's Foundation, a community-supported foundation dedicated to investing in the power of women and girls of color in the Washington, D.C. region. Jennifer joined the foundation in 2008, providing strategic guidance while leading the program development and communications functions. Jennifer has devoted her entire career to advancing equity and justice for women and girls. Prior to joining the Women's Foundation, Jennifer served as the Director of Public Policy at the National Family Planning and Reproductive Health Association and spent 10 years at the Women's Congressional Policy Institute. And a super fun fact for us, Jennifer was born and raised here in New Hampshire and is a proud graduate of UNH. Go Wildcats. Thank you both for being here. We're so happy to have you here. And you have been models to me in my work as a CEO within the women's funding world. And if only I can have and do everything that you've done during your careers. So one of the terms that we talk about a lot is gender justice philanthropy, and philanthropy, social change philanthropy, being change agents within our work. And I would love to just hear more about what the Ms. Foundation, what your focus is on, and what you think about this term gender justice philanthropy.
Yeah, so, at the Ms. Foundation, we don't look at our work as just gender justice philanthropy. We ask a lot of questions of ourselves and of the field, and we listen. Mm-hmm. And in that process, one of the things that we have realized, and I have realized, as much as the Ms. Foundation is around supporting women and girls, it is actually more important around getting towards equity, inclusion, and equality. Mm-hmm. And so using the term gender justice assumes a binary gendered position, and we are far more expansive than that. And we sit at the intersection of race and gender. Mm-hmm. We recognize that you have multiple identities and you may have multiple positions on those identities. And so we don't necessarily identify as a gender justice foundation. We do work on a multitude of issues. So we are an organization that works towards equity, equality, and inclusion for all. In that work, we are doing it from the lens of what it means to support those most marginalized in our society. At this point, it is women and girls of color. So the intersection of race and gender that sits at the most at that intersection, what that needs to look like. And so we've really been very conscious about language, because language is important. We don't work on women's issues, and we don't work for the women's movement. Women's issues, that just marginalizes our issues. We work on the issues that affect the lives of women and their communities, and we work on the issue, and we work in the movements that affect the lives of women and their communities. That breadth of movements language actually means that we're talking about environmental justice, racial justice, reproductive justice. I mean, the list goes on, and it recognizes that women's lives and those who identify as women are sitting at an intersection of all of these movements and are in places of leadership. Almost every social justice movement in the past 100 years has been led by women, particularly women and girls of color.
How about you, Jennifer?
Well, it's so interesting listening to you, Teresa, because I think this is the thing that brings so much joy and energy and excitement to the work we're doing, and it's also what makes the work really, really hard.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Because there's a constant evolution of the work, the language we use, how we define things. It's ever changing, and it will continue to change, right? I think we had moments in time where language and the movement was very static, and now there's such energy and joy and excitement about the changes we can make. And it's scary and it's really hard because it's entirely new language, right? So when you say gender justice, philanthropy, and Teresa, you're talking about the intersection and intersectionality, which was coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. that's language that we may not have used,
Right.
10, 20, and for some people, even just a couple of years ago, right? It's new.
And we use the term gender
Yeah.
expansive, we use gender
Yeah.
nonconforming, we use, there are those that identify as transgender. right?
Absolutely.
There's a whole bunch of new language. You have
Yeah.
to be willing to risk saying the wrong thing.
Right. Yes.
Because it is changing every day. And it is changing because people are identifying how they choose to identify.
Yeah. Right.
Their voice, their story, their lived experiences are rising to the top of these conversations, and we have to respect the language they want.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what I love about that and about language in general, and also you saying that you have to make mistakes in order, as you move towards being more accepting, more aware, more educated. I love that you're almost giving permission to say you're going to get it wrong as you move along.
Absolutely.
But
Every day.
Every day, all the time.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But that ultimately, what you're trying to do is bring more people into the tent and identify everyone as they want to be identified. So you both have gotten a chance to hear about, and as we mentioned earlier, the Women's Foundation, the New Hampshire Women's Foundation's new strategic priorities. The upshot of COVID, as I said, was that we didn't just work on our values and memorialize at this moment in time what our values are, but we also worked on our strategic plan and priorities. And those three strategic priorities are voice, money, and power. And those are pretty strong words, each and every one of them. But we believe very strongly that to be able to really do this work, to be able to both support and elevate women and girls, and really everyone in this state, that we need to make sure that women and girls in marginalized communities have money, they have voice, and they have power. And us as an organization can't shy away from that. So our values include being clear about our seeking a more racially equitable, gender equitable, socioeconomically equitable life for everyone here in New Hampshire, being bold and courageous, and making sure that we are collaborating, that we can't be doing this on our own. I would love to know what you think about that. When you think about those three words, voice, power, and money, how does that resonate with you? What do you think?
I love it. I absolutely love it. I think it is really amazing. I think if we want to function with intention, then we need to really say what we're talking about, right? Voice can come in a way of qualifying people's lived experiences. Voice comes in a way of lifting up that you need to be at your town hall meetings and you need to be at the state capitol. Voice is recognizing that sometimes you yell and sometimes you whisper, right? Voice is like all of those things, and it has been placed in value. For years, women did not identify as the philanthropists themselves. They would put their male partner's name or husband's name as the way it happened. But now our voices matter. And I have very strong reaction to the word money. I think it is brilliant. We cannot, as women, shy away from money as a reality. Money itself is not bad. What we do with it, how we achieve it, all those things, there may be things that are couched around that, but we should not apologize for success. And would it be okay if everybody had enough money to live on? And what does that mean? And it is often said that women will walk back from conversations around money. We need to walk into those conversations about money. We need to get most comfortable about it. Where oftentimes we're embarrassed by how much we make or how little we make. When we need to stop all of that and just say, there's a reality. We need this is the currency to live and the currency to build out the next generation. So what does that need to look like? And I just thrive on the word power. I think it is not to empower, it is to seed power and give power, right? And take power. And I really like all of that. And I think together, they really do lay out a really nice roadmap for, and the ability to pivot and turn when you need to, by what you are hearing when people are using their voice, to help people direct where their money needs to go and direct it in a way that formulates trust in the New Hampshire Women's Foundation, right? So that people are giving their money through you to impact the ground. And in that groundwork and those organizations that you are giving money to, it is not just charity, it is about change. And it is about them instituting power. It is about shifting power. And we have to get a little uncomfortable to shift power, but we need to make sure that we are shifting power.
Yeah.
I love that.
And the voice, I agree with so you're not going to get a lot of disagreement here.
You're not going to disagree up here on stage.
On this, we love all these words.
I love it, and I really commend the work that you, the staff, and the board have done around getting to this place, around voice, money, and power. All three words are incredibly powerful and actionable, which I think is fantastic, and so needed in this moment in time. And I think the other piece we talked earlier about language matters, and oftentimes we'll talk about giving voice, giving money, giving power, which sometimes really doesn't sit awesome with some of us, right? And I think the role that women's foundations and New Hampshire Women Foundation can play is about creating the space for women to step in and own their voice, their money, and their power, right? And creating spaces for that to happen in really safe manners where folks can share their stories, right? And it is their own truth and however they define it, right? We can have these very open conversations about money and how much money needs to move into community in order to affect the change that you're trying to make. And the power piece is so critical, especially when we're talking about racial equity and racial justice. Who hoards power? Who cedes power, who has a seat at a table, and it's not just a seat at a table, that's great that the chair is there, but it's actually about is there power in that person sitting at that table and having a decision-making part of the conversation. So I love what you're doing, voice, money, and power, because they're connected too. You can't really do one without the other. They're all so interconnected. And in this moment in time where we're having such critical conversations about the intersection of race and gender and what kind of a world do we all want to live in, these three strategies are, critical components of that. So I commend you for moving in this direction.
Well, thank you. I think for us, as we thought about what our place is here in this state, and knowing that the roots of philanthropy, as we all know, are very patriarchal, right? Philanthropy has been, that tower that we all seek, the funds that we all fight for, right? And as we all know, women's philanthropy and women's foundations give out money differently, right? They have relationships with grantees in a different way. We are really proud of the fact that the first fund that we are launching this year is our Women and Girls of Color Fund, because we sit in multiple places at any point in time, stand in multiple places at one point in time, philanthropy and advocacy. And we want to make sure that we are being clear as a funder to say, we are not going to say women and girls of color who are leading organizations or women and girls of color who are served by organizations. Those organizations can apply just to this fund. Rather, we're trying to put more dollars out there for these organizations and to these leaders. But that is new and uncomfortable for us, right? I mean, that is it's our first fund that we're creating. Our second is our reproductive and sexual healthcare access fund. Again, because we're both making a statement that we think this is important, but also that we want to be working with our funders, our close donors, to be able to drive more dollars there. I wonder if you guys have examples of that. I know that you do. And I wonder what you think about for your organizations, how you can be most impactful when you are working with philanthropic communities and trying to drive dollars.
I'll start by sharing an example of something we did at Washington Area Women's Foundation in partnership with 8 other women's foundations across the country, which was becoming a part of a Young Women's Initiative, and it grew out of work that Teresa and I and a group of us just had the privilege of doing with the Obama administration on a body of work that they were doing advancing equity for women and girls of color. And the Young Women's Initiative came about in part in response to My Brother's Keeper and an incredible investment that was being made in Black men and boys, which we all recognize was absolutely crucial. And we wanted to have a conversation about both and, right? What about Black women and girls? What about women and girls of color? And so we had an opportunity to model a program after something that was happening in New York City with Girls for Gender Equity and the New York Women's Foundation, which was to create an initiative that was really led by young women of color. And it was to create a policy agenda. So the way we approach the work in DC is a lot of listening to young women in our community about how they define the issues, right? We could say economic security, but what does that mean to you? And how would you define it? And what would you do to make change? And so drafted a blueprint that essentially became a policy agenda for the city of DC around how to make the city a better place for young women of color. And that was kind of the beginning for us to shift the way in which we engaged in our community. When we talk about voice, money, and power, it really was centering the lived experiences and voices of young women. It wasn't the professional staff of the foundation saying, we think the following policies should be top of our agenda. It was really centering, listening, and then acting on. So at the direction of young women versus at the direction of the staff and our donors. And that Young Women's Initiative, for us, I think established some trust in our community in a way that we hadn't had before, because we were walking the walk and demonstrating that, in fact, this really was, it was their voice, it's their dollars. They get to decide where the grants are made. They're advocating, it's their policy agenda. We are in a supporting position. We are in allyship in whatever way the young women define. And it fundamentally changed how we approached our work as a philanthropic entity, as a women's foundation, and changed our relationships with community that then allowed us to pivot and go even further and deeper on the work.
And at the Ms. Foundation, we had been funding women and girls of color for a long time. But one of the things that we have done in the past 5 years under our new strategic plan was we are centering women and girls of color, which is different. Because if you close your eyes and I say the word woman, what comes to mind? It is rarely that the person that comes to mind looks like me. And so if that's the case, how do we recenter how I get to be in the middle and then make decisions around that? So when I got to the Ms. Foundation for Women 7 years ago, they had, I was the first Black woman to lead the foundation in over 30 years. And so we really, you know, as I sat there, as I listened, as I began to do this work, we realized that we had to start figuring out what was happening in communities of color, what was happening with women and girls of color. As Jennifer said, we were able to come together, a group of us from the women's funding community, and start having conversation. We broke that out a number of different ways. And it was a reflection on what is philanthropy doing. And at that time, we found that philanthropy was actually allocating about $5.48 per woman and girl of color in this country.
Wow.
That's not very much. That's a cup of coffee, right? And
It's
when we,
abysmal.
you know, when we dug deeper, we started to see, like in the South, it's less than $2.22, right? And then Northeast, it's a little bit more. But in the middle part of the country, where you know I grew up, where you grew up, it was even less, right? So we needed to really take a look at what was going out from philanthropy and why. How were they identifying that? And also recognizing that when we say the term women and girls of color, we're talking about a political power base, not an assumption that women and girls of color are monolithic, right? Because we are not. We hold a whole bunch of different identities. We define ourselves as something different. But this was a way to put all of that together. And that report, you know, gave so much information back to philanthropy. So, we at the Ms. Foundation had been funding women and girls of color amongst our funding choices. We had not centered women and girls of color as a point of decision making. So that was a point of change for us. But it also, we took a look at what was going on. And what we found was that philanthropy was not actually saying who they were funding. So many of the organizations, we monitored about 1,200 organizations in the work that we were doing in preparation for that report. And what we heard from the field was, we don't know who's funding us. They were saying it, we were saying it, but we weren't explicit about it, right? So we thought, well, we need to start naming it. If you are going to fund in this space, you need to say that you're funding in this space. Because these organizations, as many organizations are in this country, are small budgets, $500,000. They are doing this, but women are doing this, but possibly not paying themselves because they're doing it as a labor of love, right? And they are volunteering, or it's their side hustle. They're, you know, there were a whole bunch of reasons. So you have to name what you are doing. And so when we came out in, you know, in our new strategic plan, we said we will center women and girls of color. We are naming it, not as a point of exclusion, but a point of inclusion. So that when you closed your eyes, you start seeing them, right? We also said, we're gonna start tracking it. How many dollars are moving in this space? And we're gonna ask philanthropy to track it. How many dollars are moving in this space? And we are going to increase it. What we have today cannot be acceptable for the next generation. And so name it, track it, increase it is part of our pocket change overview. But it didn't just happen. You know, one of the realities, and I think Jennifer can speak to this also, is that it takes time to make change happen, and you have to be okay with being uncomfortable. You have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So, you know, even I went to my board and said, like, what if we do this? What does this look like? 6 years ago, we put together, at that time, the first Black all-femme cohort to look at issues around safety. That was the first one in the country that was explicitly for that. Based on that, we were able to expand out the work we were doing. But it was uncomfortable. It was really hard. I'm a Black woman, and I'm saying we need to center the work that I'm doing just as much as everything else. And people were like, oh, well, maybe you don't care about us. I was like, no, I actually do, right? I actually want a world that is reflective of my sister who's Korean, and my other sister who's Japanese, and my good friends who are white women. I want a world that is reflective of all of us being able to stand in our power and be funded at ways that allow us to make change in our communities. And we, you know, based on that, we do trust-based philanthropy. We give money, we build relationships, and we trust, we give general operating support. We trust that women will do what they need to do. And maybe they will actually pay themselves to do the work that needs to change the communities. And maybe they'll be able to do everything else. And if we trust that they're doing it for the right reason, then we don't always worry that they're gonna do something bad, right? How will New Hampshire and the New Hampshire Women's Foundation really embrace this? What does this look like? Where are the conversations gonna happen around voice, money, and power from the intersection of people's lives, including the very small population of women of color and people and girls of color in the state, right? It's not a huge population, but it's still critical. Because those, you know, I've used this example before, in the pool of inequality, there are a whole bunch of people in that pool of inequality. And if we're gonna drop a pebble in one spot, hopefully we'll drop a boulder one day and splash people out of the pool of inequality, but we're gonna drop a pebble. We're gonna drop that pebble over women and girls of color. It means everybody that's in that pool will be touched by the ripples that go out, and that everybody will do better in that process. And that's really, you know, when I hear you talk about the new fund that you all are starting around women and girls of color, I think, that means everybody in the pool is going to just get a little bit better, a little bit more. They're going to be able to have more open and honest conversation. They're going to be able to speak from a place of truth and intention, and we get to decide that we are going to start trusting women. And that is what women's funds have done so well for so long, and that we actually have to not just trust them today, but trust them, trust us all,
Yeah.
for the generational change that needs to take place. And it will not happen tomorrow. It's going to happen over time.
I love what you said about that, the ripple in the pond of inequality, because that's certainly what we hear here in New Hampshire, those of us who are trying to either lead, participate, support race and equity work is look at our demographics, look at our state demographics. We are an overwhelmingly white state. So why are you focusing on that? So I really appreciate what you said there, because I think that that is spot on and certainly speaks to what we as a foundation hope to just be able to impact in some way, right? And to continue to grow that impact. When I think about the change, not charity, I wonder if that isn't a starting point when you think about how to expand philanthropic communities, how to bring more people into the work that we do. Is it by talking first about change, do you think?
Yeah, I think we have to really do a critical analysis of the systems that have been set up. And in most cases, they were not designed for or by any of us, particularly women, trans folks, gender non-conforming, gender expansive people. Like, they were not designed for or by us. So we have to do an analysis of the change we need to make. And I think what's really exciting for me about young people today is that they're coming into roles of learning and pushback, because many high schools and colleges are requiring them to volunteer their time. And so they're seeing where some of these disparities and injustices are holding up. And so when we start to talk about change, changing is a reflection of oneself, but it's also a systemic and societal change. And what does that need to look like? And so, as opposed to, I'm doing this because it's good for me, right? And I'm going to help them. This is about how do we make sure that as a society we are all in a better space, and that is what we need to change. We need to change how we do the work that we are doing. We need to challenge what that looks like so that we can get out of the mindset that I'm going to help you, because you may be in this position not because you did anything. You could have been born in and out of circumstance, right? So, let's not get caught up into where that sits, but let's work at what needs to be changed, and how do we change? How do we fund change? You fund change by trusting people's experiences. You fund change by doing what you can. Change does not mean that we need only billionaires in this country to decide that they're going to move money. Change is collective power, that if you do, I do, and Jennifer does, we get someplace faster. That's a change mechanism. That means we all care about each other, and we are going to move towards the collective power that will get us to the change we need to do. We're going to use money as a tool to make that happen.
And it means you might not have that personal satisfaction moment of, just as you said, Teresa, I made this gift, I helped this one woman over here, and now I feel really good because I'm making change in my community. But one by one, each woman, each girl is not going to create change, right? That's the charity component. The change is breaking down the system, right? Changing the policies all together and creating an entirely new system that works for everyone. But you don't get that reciprocal, I feel really good about myself today because I wrote that check, right? Because it's long-term. You don't always see it, but it's the most important part of what we and you, New Hampshire Women's Foundation, can do with voice, money, and power.
But I wonder, as you think about our work as leaders in this movement, in this period in time, what gives you hope? What are you excited about, or what do you believe we will see in the future?
Wow, that's a great question.
That's a powerful one.
I am incredibly hopeful. I actually am inspired every day by the women that I see in leadership, by the grantee partners that we are in relationship with, by the truthful conversations that are going on, by the risk that people are willing to take in this moment in time. We have got nothing to lose.
Yeah.
And so we have to we have to lean into what that's all going to be about and really feel okay. I'm inspired by your 85-year-old founding board member. I'm inspired by Gloria Steinem as much as I'm inspired by the 15-year-old, young woman who's leading organizations, who's challenging systems. Every day I feel inspired. This has been an incredibly difficult time for so many, as you said. We are seeing so many significant problems in society, and they're just bubbling up, right? Childcare, bubbling up, healthcare, bubbling. There's so many issues that are bubbling up. And I feel like we're in a spot where, if not now, when?
It's quite literally what I say all the time. If not now, when?
And it is not us, who?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I feel like this is the time. I really, I always say, I look at my bag, there's nothing in there. I can't worry about what was in that bag because we need to move forward. And this is the time. This is 2021. Before we get to 2050, maybe we can start addressing this. Maybe we could, as adults ourselves, take the risk. Take the risk to fail, to say the wrong thing, but do it with the intention of doing the right thing. Apologize when you've done it wrong and keep moving forward, because we cannot do this just one person leading the way. We can only do this if we have the collective of us doing it together. And that excites me. It makes me really excited that I can be sitting in New Hampshire in 2021, having an open and honest conversation with a dear friend of mine and a new friend of mine about the work we need to do together.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
That was powerful. I'm also deeply inspired, but maybe in slightly different ways, which is, this has been such a hard time, right? There's nobody who hasn't been impacted by COVID in one way or the other. And I think it has forced us to work in different ways and to honor people as human beings in the workplace in ways that we have not done before. And so when I look around and I see colleagues checking in with one another, and I know self-care is a term that's being thrown around a lot, but really, truly checking in with one another. What are you doing? Are you okay? What do you need? How can I help out? You need time off, you need a break. How do we make that happen? And I'm watching more organizations maneuver and make changes that are about honoring the care of the human beings that work there. And that's been truly inspiring to me, because we've never done it before. Never done it before. And it is so needed in this time. If we don't take care of ourselves, and I may be being very selfish about this because I did choose to leave the Women's Foundation in June. I stepped aside and I've taken some time off, in part because I needed to do some care, but also because it was time to really step aside and do this work around racial justice from a different perspective and create space for women of color to come in and lead and take the organization to the next level. I'm inspired by our youth. I have two daughters. One just graduated college. One is a first year in college. Teresa knows them well. They're all the things that my husband said, well, you said you wanted to raise strong, feisty, independent, feminist. And
now you're reconsidering that.
And maybe slightly. But I'm inspired by our youth. I'm inspired by the 15-year-old who, puffed up their chest when they realized they were a donor. And so that gives me hope that we can fundamentally change. It's hard. I think especially for white women in this work, I said this when we talked, but getting really comfortable with being uncomfortable all the time, because we are going to step in it. We're going to make mistakes, and it's okay. Teresa said this fabulous, failing fabulously. And it's what you do with that failure. It's how you take that and learn and incorporate that into doing better and being better. Yeah. And that's what we're all here to do. So I'm inspired by all of the women around me. I get to work with Teresa, you, the other members of the Women's Foundations across the country, and our youth, because I think we can truly make change, and real change, not charity, but change that makes all of our lives better. So
yeah, I'm always reminded that we do not have to do everything.
Yes.
I think as women, we sometimes believe we're supposed to do everything.
And have all the answers.
And have all the
Do it
answers.
perfectly.
Yeah. But we just need to do one thing.
Yeah.
Just do one thing every day. It's like that one step, and we can get so much further. Give ourselves space and grace and pace how we want to do that one thing.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be perfect.
Does not.
It does not have to be perfect.
Yeah. What did Glennon Doyle say? Something like, a radical woman is a rested woman.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
After COVID, right? Being able to do one thing and to remember that all you have to do is one thing, that we can't give it all and we can't do it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for being here. I hope you'll come back to New Hampshire when you can see people in person. But I'm just so grateful to each of you, to the work that you do every day, and for believing in what we're doing here in New Hampshire and at the New Hampshire Women's Foundation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What an incredible conversation. I hope it has clarified for you how these three priorities of voice, money, and power are so important to name explicitly as we do this work to drive systemic change for women and girls in New Hampshire. I want you to think back to when you first saw or heard these words, voice, money, and power. Maybe it was on an invitation or a promotion for today's event, or maybe it was at the start of the program today. How did those words hit you? Did they make you feel uncomfortable? Were you inspired? And after hearing our conversation with Teresa and Jennifer, do you think about them differently? We hope you'll continue to consider these priorities as you engage with us in the coming year. And we hope that you'll join us in our work by supporting us today. Several generous donors have stepped up to match donations of up to $50,000 between now and the end of the year. We need you to harness your philanthropic dollars to support the Women's Foundation. As I mentioned before, it's easy to give by texting NHWF to 44321 or going to our website, nhwomensfoundation.org. Every year I ask you the same thing at this event. Take a few moments to support women and girls in New Hampshire by supporting the Women's Foundation. Thank you in advance for your support. And thanks for joining us at our 17th annual Women Building Community Lunch Online. We hope that we will see you next fall in person. Fingers crossed. Thanks to our staff and our board for supporting this event today. Thanks to all of you for joining us and giving us an hour of your time. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon.